Superintendent Shane Farnsworth of the Alpine School District, and I will give you a brief overview of how we have implemented House Bill 374. We receive guidance from the state on with respect to a model policy that came to us in about August. Prior to that, we received some instruction and direction from the Attorney General's office. We became aware through some patron emails of some possible violations of House Bill 374 that were in our schools. We did an internal review and identified 52 titles that we felt merited further review. Once the that committee went through their procurement process and reviewed that, we held on those books, a formal review of those books, until we finalized our policy. In September, the first board meeting in September, we reviewed our policy. The board passed and approved that policy in Alpine School District. That is policy 6161. That was approved by the Board of Education. At that point, we developed 25 district committees that consisted of patrons and employees from each of our secondary schools. There were more patrons than employees on those committees, and they began the process of reviewing those 52 titles that we identified. The second board meeting in September, the board finalized that policy. To date, 49 of those 52 committee, those reviews have been finalized. Of those 49 titles, 22 have been removed. 18 have been restricted, either by age appropriate or parent permission, and 9 of those have been retained. To my knowledge, to date, we have one patron requested review going on in our schools. The other 52 were done by an internal review process. That's kind of the status of where we are with implementation of that policy.
Thank you, Superintendent. Did your partner there, are you going
Yes.
to respond? Please.
I'm not sure if this is on, but I guess.
And your name?
I'm Mark Clement. I'm the school board president in Alpine School District.
Thank you.
I wanted to provide maybe a little context for how this worked. Prior to this legislation, there was a really a process that worked really well. Librarians are trained professionals. They are not trying to peddle pornography to students. They're trying to help to protect them. And so when a student would come to them, the process was the librarian would suggest books that were appropriate for that student's values and needs, emotional needs. If a parent didn't want their child to access certain classes of books, they could contact the librarian and she would prohibit those from being checked out. Teachers provided instructional materials that was thought-provoking and helped to achieve their educational objectives. If a parent objected to some of those, they would provide alternate materials. And that's kind of the process that was going on prior to this bill's passage. The school board tried to, we met before the mechanics that the superintendent has mentioned with parents, librarians, teachers, worked on, I think, 11 drafts of our policy, and really tried to include all of the stakeholders. In addition to probably the people who are here, at least in last time's meeting, there's a strong contingent of our patrons who object to having censorship and were pushing back against further restrictions. We tried to work with them in a policy that would make that happen. I think maybe some of the details as to how we've been performing these reviews is we decided we do not want to buy a bunch of books that could be questionable. And so we have been trying to gather books from throughout the district to perform these reviews. So as a book is challenged or as we become aware that there could be problems in terms of compliance, We will try to gather those from throughout the district and maybe an interlibrary loan type arrangement. So really, as soon as we become aware that those books need to be examined, they are unavailable for checkout by students. But again, the ACLU's also contacted us and been concerned about removing books without them going through the process. So those have not been restricted or removed, but just they're unavailable for students so that we can put them through the process. I just wanted to make you aware of a few other things that have happened since the passage of this bill. We have had police arrive at a library because someone's reported that there's people distributing pornography to children, which has scared our librarians and made them less effective.
Excuse me, are you saying to your school library?
Yes.
Law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they were reported by somebody who, again, was kind of weaponized in this whole process. We've also had, at my high school, we've had English teachers that just brought all their books into the principal's office and said, I'm not going to teach anything if you're going to be so critical of what I'm doing and cause me to be under threat of a violation of a law and prosecution. And I just hope that you're aware of, I think that as a result, the district has looked at our procurement process. I believe this was very valuable. I think that a lot of times we would just buy a bundle of books from a publisher as opposed to reading each of them. That part of our policy has been very valuable in terms of helping us to keep books that would violate community standards from getting on the shelves. But I hope you realize there's also been a large negative in terms of teachers feeling that they are not trusted or that they are being labeled as pushing pornography when really what they're trying to do is help children to learn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your presentation, and thank you very much for making the trip to come back down. We're going to have questions. I'll allow maybe one comment or question given the length of our agenda. So let's go to Senator Johnson.
One of the statements you made was about the Attorney General's opinion that you got. Can you tell me which Attorney General's opinion you're talking about?
There were two memos or guidance that came from the Attorney General's office helping us line was and how those laws should be interpreted.
So you do understand the bright line rule then?
Absolutely.
I can see why teachers would be somewhat afraid, given that the new law, that the law actually outlines exactly what pornography is. And it is a felony in the state of Utah for someone to distribute pornography to children. So that bright line rule is really important. Other books that don't cross that line can certainly be, looked at for the full, look at the full book and see what the literary value is. But when there is pornography within the book that's clearly identified in the statute, those books really need to go out as soon as you can.
And we have been in consultation with the Attorney General's office as we proceed with our policy and the enactment or operationalization of that policy.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on now and excuse you gentlemen. We're going to move to the Davis School District, Superintendent Toon and Board President Robison. If you'd come forward. Oh, by the way, while you're coming forward, there's still a lot of people wanting to get into this room. Law enforcement patrolmen, if you would remind them that room 450 is open and available as our overflow. We need to keep the aisles clear, but we do have an overflow for you. Thank you very much. So gentlemen, if one of you will start and introduce yourself, we'll hear from you.
Thank you, Chair Snow. My name is John Robison. I'm in Davis School District, and Dr. Toon and Dr. Linford, our superintendent, is with us today as well, Chair. We appreciate the opportunity we have to come today and As you mentioned, Chair Snow, a few minutes have been allocated for us to talk about the items that were brought up in the October 19th regarding the Ethics Commission and having school board members possibly accountable to that commission. And there were some things that were brought up relative to our district that I wanted to briefly address today and then turn the time over to Dr. Toon and Dr. Linford. The president of Utah Parents United made a couple comments at the beginning that I would just say in a brief conversation with me, the answers to her concerns could have been alleviated. There were three things she talked about in the July 13, 2021 school board meeting, being locked out of the building and having to be let in by a police officer. She talked about not being able to go into the workshop because it had already been started. And she talked about not being able to move the chairs that were separated by 3 feet, not being able to move those chairs closer together. The reference really, or the inference I should say, was made that that was a school board decision or school, and I think she was primarily directing those comments to me as a board president. None of those decisions was made by a board member. Those were all made by district administrators, and in the case of not being able to go into the workshop, by a staff member who mistakenly not allowed her to go in. She should have been able to go in. So I just mentioned that to kind of clarify that the board members weren't involved in those decisions. Regarding the gentleman that was Ms. Mason's witness, I would remind the committee that this is the same gentleman that was in the Deseret News on March 12th that had to be handcuffed and taken out of a March 1st meeting up here in a hearing that was taking place because he did not follow the rules that Senator McKay had asked him to follow. And today I don't have time to dispute all of the things that he brought up, but just let me mention a couple because I think it shows that there was a tremendous amount of misinformation shared with the committee on October 19th. First, the gentleman indicated that after he made a public comment, and I quote, he said, "Then I sat down and left the meeting early." He did not leave the meeting on his own. He was asked to leave by our assistant security director and 2 police officers from Farmington City because of his disturbance of the meeting, and he was escorted out of the meeting.
Excuse me, President.
Yes.
Those are, I think, important for you to respond to, but what we really need to hear is your progress on implementation, and I don't want to cut you short on that, but that's the most important thing today.
Well, I understand that, Chair Snow, so I'll turn the time over. I think what you're saying is don't say anything else, but
I don't want to say, don't say anything else.
Senator Johnson gave these people close to 30 minutes to talk about this, and a lot of what was said was derogatory towards our district and was incorrect.
Okay.
So what I'll do is I'll disseminate that information that I was going to share today to the members of the committee because I think it sheds a different light.
I would appreciate that, and I hope you understand where the emphasis is. Tight schedule, but not my intention to throttle you.
I'll turn the time to Dr. Toon or Dr. Linford.
Thank you. Thank you for your service on this committee. We appreciate the work that you do here. I'm Dan Linford. I'm superintendent of Davis School District. I appreciate just a couple minutes to respond to some things and to maybe set the stage for what we'd like to talk about. I do want to say that in an email we received that we were told that we would be able to respond to some of those things outside of the sensitive materials policy. So I apologize for that.
No reason to apologize, and maybe I should have meant more clear. I meant respond to the allegations about whether or not there'd been proper implementation.
Yeah, that's great. And so I want to be clear, and it was suggested by a guest in a prior committee meeting that Davis School District is not intentional about implementing House Bill 374. And I want to be clear as the superintendent, and I know that it was suggested that leadership in some form had said that we're not doing it or that we're against this bill. We are implementing it in earnest. Previously, and of course you have the timeline in your materials, we feel that our progress is as aggressive as it can possibly be. Once we received the guidance from the Attorney General and the model policy, our school board immediately went to work on a policy. We were aggressive. We worked throughout the summer. We had 6 or 7 meetings, developed the policy, and implemented it. We feel that the Attorney General gave really great advice, and there is a balance, and there's an appropriate way to do policy. It may or may not, make splashes on the front page, but it's critical that we write policy that can withstand the test of time. We will always and always have and always will follow the laws of the great state of Utah. We're committed to that. We feel that we were, as one of the first districts to actually have a policy in place that we can follow, that we can avoid the letters from the ACLU, and I think we're well underway. We were not going to be involved in prior restraint or other risks that the Attorney General asked us to avoid. We have a sensible policy that is driven by parents, that's parent heavy, and I'll ask Dr. Toon to outline our progress on that, but I want to let this committee know that we're committed to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Logan Toon, Assistant Superintendent with Davis School District. I'll take just the last remaining moments of our time here and just outline a couple of key points in our existing policy as it was recently revised by our school board. A lot of the work that we did is surrounding our sensitive material reviews for library materials that are already in our library collection, but I think it's worth noting too that our policy also addresses the acquisition of future library materials. We established a committee at each school level where the committee has a parent majority, and each of those purchases of future library books is approved by that parent committee, and they're given all of the training and information surrounding the legal requirements for library books. Once all those acquisition decisions and the maintenance decisions are maintained at the school library level, maintaining as much of the that local focus as we can possibly have. But the district is taking on the reviews of sensitive materials. Anything that is suspected or claimed to violate the state law, HB 374, is brought to a district committee. The law requires the LEA to solicit parental input from a group of parents that is representative of the school community. And so we seek to accomplish that by having our committees made up of two different pathways for parents to serve on our district review committees. They can either be appointed to a parent review pool by their community council, or they can volunteer to be a community reviewer, and we choose two parents from each of those pools for our committees. We've had 64 requests for different titles to be reviewed at the district level for sensitive materials, and in order to accommodate the volume of those requests, we've appointed 14 different review committees. So we have 14 committees that are simultaneously reviewing different titles from that group of 64. 44 titles currently under review, 11 titles with a completed review. All 11 of those titles were determined to be removed from the libraries. The determination to retain a library book often requires a few additional steps that take a look at some of those quality of the book as a whole, value to minors, things like that. Sometimes the designation, given the bright line expectation that the Attorney General memo made clear, sometimes those designations can be made quickly, and we're making them as quickly as possible if we can. If not, we need to do a full review of those materials and make those decisions. So as it currently stands, we're implementing those processes as quickly as we can. I do want to just note that our adherence to the bright line rule is clear in our district policy in section 2C of the June 1st Attorney General memo. That's the direction we've given our review committees. We don't have unanimity on all of our committees, but those decisions are made by majority vote and then upheld. Our policy allows for appeals of those decisions. We've yet to have any of our current decisions appealed. We anticipate some of those decisions may be appealed, but we're ready to handle those when they come.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Before you step down, we have one question from, I think, Representative Walter. We'll have time to take one. And Representative Moss, maybe follow up with you, but we're not going to take any more than that. Thanks.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chair. Say that as a member of this committee, it was disappointing to see personal attacks being levied without the opportunity for rebuttal, and that was a failure on the part of this committee to adequately either prepare or to manage the last hearing. So I apologize for for my part in that, for being on this committee where you guys felt attacked and were not able to respond. Appreciate your response today. One thing I'll say is I supported this bill. I think, in principle, we all, I don't think there's anybody in this room that would say we want to give pornography to minors. I don't think there's a single person in here. Now, how we do that and how we implement that is where the, where the rubber hits the road. So we adjust laws all the time up here. And so as you go through this process with your peers, I would strongly suggest that you work with the State Board of Education and the State Office of Education to make suggestions that would allow these processes to go more smoothly, continue to involve parents, continue to refine this process so that we don't have conflicts coming out of these issues that we don't need to have. So that's just an encouragement to you and to your other to your peers and to the state board that you look at what works, what doesn't work, and come back to your representatives to make adjustments as necessary. Those are things we do all the time. And again, appreciate your diligence and willingness to try to protect our kids and teach them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Brief comment from Representative Carol Moss.
Thank you. I concur with what Representative Waldrop said about your inability to respond to statements made against you. And I want to just say that it's very unfortunate that I learned that some of you have had death threats. And this is just unacceptable. I mean, to be in a nonpartisan position, serving your community, and then to be a victim of threats like that to your safety and your family's safety is wrong on every level. But the one thing I want you to clarify is you talk about some books are read in their entirety and some are not. I mean, how can you determine a book's worth if every book isn't read in its entirety? And one more question, and that is, are you saying every book that's purchased for your library, even if it's about math or science, is reviewed? I mean, this seems unwieldy and unnecessary.
Regarding the book in its entirety, there's a guidance in that section 2C of the AGO's memo that said that there's a phrase in one of the three codes referenced in HB 374 that determines if certain types of content are described or depicted, then that work does not have value to a minor. And that's the definition in state code. And that's what we're implementing in those early designations. If the committee feels that those particular specific list of content in the law are described or depicted, then we remove based on that. Many of our folks do not agree with that line in the code, but that's the line in the code and we're implementing it with fidelity. And so the full review, which requires the committee members to read the book and weigh in the balance the value of the book and the life of minors and the learning experiences that they're having, comes once the designation has been made that the book does not describe or depict those specific things on the three lines of code that are referenced. That's the first question. The second question about acquisition, the committee has approves all of those purchases, but each book is not necessarily read in its entirety by the committee. That's up to individual committee members on the acquisition side of things, whether they want to review the book in its entirety before they vote to approve or not. But each title that is acquired in the school libraries is noted and voted to approve by the school level committee.
Thank you, Mr. Tim.
I hope you have some teachers on those committees, particularly English teachers who've studied literature.
We do. Every school level committee and district level committee has a librarian and an English teacher serving on the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moss. Apologize for interrupting you. Senator Johnson, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of misunderstanding that's out there, and I think that's where parents get somewhat stirred up. For instance, the Library Association actually had a banned book week, which your librarian actually followed up with. And there was a poster basically in the library that said banned book week, get these, books before they're taken out. Every one of these books on the table are books that violate the bright line rule. And I'm just wondering, when parents come in and see stuff like that, they think, well, these people aren't following the law, and so it really bothers them a lot. And then we just have the acceleration of things. I'm glad to hear that you have a good understanding now of what that bright line rule is and how you're responding to that. Apart from but I'm just wondering, are any of these books still in your library?
Yeah, the books are in the library until the committee has the opportunity to take a look and review them. That requirement in the law that an LEA is required to have parental input in the determination of whether a book contains sensitive materials. That's our adherence to the process that we follow up until the point of that committee review.
So are those books available for checkout to students?
Between the time that they're up until the time that they're reviewed by the committee and the determination is made, yes, they remain in circulation.
I think that may be the reason why people want to send them to the school if these books are checked out, because if they violate the bright line rule, they're supposed to be removed immediately.
But through a process, correct?
They're supposed to not be available for children if they violate the bright line rule.
Our interpretation of HB 374 is that the LEA is required to utilize the representative of the community in determining whether a book contains sensitive materials, and if they do, then at that point we understand with that designation that they violate the bright line rule and they're immediately removed at that point.
Thank you. I think what you're saying is that bright line rule in that review process.
Correct.
We're going to move on. Senator Fillmore, have you got a quick comment?
I just wonder what immediately means. If you say they're removed immediately, and I understand there'd be a process, but if Senator Johnson is correct, and that this was in September, that these banned books were on a table, and it's now November, and over those 2 months, has there not been a review of these 6 books?
Yeah.
It seems like 2 months is plenty of time to have a review process.
We have 64 books that have been requested to be reviewed, 13 committees working simultaneously on those 64. And we're doing that review process thoroughly according to our policy as quickly as we possibly can.
Do you have maybe an estimate that you'd like to share about when you might expect those books to be reviewed?
Each book takes a different period of time, but we're moving very quickly. This last week, in the last 2 weeks, we reviewed. We have 44 currently under review by those committees. We've made decisions about 11 books in 2 weeks.
This process started how long ago?
When the policy was passed in September.
And would it be fair for me to assume that that's about 2 months?
Since September?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
So over those 2 months, you guys have reviewed 11 books?
No, we've formed committees. We've built parent pools to serve on these committees, had our lotteries for those parents to be selected at random so they represent the community, trained our facilitators of those committees, given all the information to the committee members, given them time to review the books, and then had the discussions that are necessary to make those designations. Yes, that process takes time.
Now it's going though.
It's
right?
up and
Like
running.
You had a
Excuse me,
lot-
excuse me, Joan. Excuse me. We can't be talking over each other, so let's speak one at a time. Senator Fillmore, if you have a question, you have a question.
Just now that the pre-work is done, I wonder if you have an estimated amount of time that you think those standing, functioning committees will be able to move through the books that you've got.
I don't know the answer to that question, but it will be quick.
Thank you. Let's go back to Senator Johnson. He has a follow-up question.
Actually, I had given you my interpretation, but I would prefer that our Associate General Counsel, Michael Curtis, comment on what I was talking about there.
Okay.
So HB 370, Michael Curtis with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. We're here just as nonpartisan staff to the committee. So Senator, to respond to your question, HB 374 does say that an LEA is required to include parents who are reflective of the members of the school's community when determining if instructional material is sensitive material. That being said, the law does contain definitions, and it also says sensitive materials are prohibited in the school setting, period. And so the statute says that as the district is looking at books, it has to involve parents. But from the day the bill is in effect, if a book contains pornography, it is prohibited in the school setting. Regardless of an LEA's determination, if it contains pornography, it's prohibited. If it meets the definition in the statute of sensitive material, it's prohibited. The public school can't use it, distribute it, provide a student access to it. So the parental involvement is a part of the process required of the LEA, but it is not a precondition to the book being prohibited or not.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Senator Reeby. You have a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all the time and effort you've given this. Our schools are very busy. We have a lot on our plate, and this is now something that has been added to our plate and it's taken up a lot of time. I understand the process we're going through, and but I also understand there's a lot of parents out there that appreciate literature that we're discussing right now. And I think it needs to be said that there are constitutional rights for free speech and for us to have these books available to parents that also want books available to their kids. I appreciate the time and energy you're taking to look at these books, because if we aren't taking this time and we aren't following the process properly, we are putting ourselves in harm for lawsuits coming the other way. So it is a delicate balance, and it's really hard, and I do appreciate the time and effort all of our school districts and our state school board has done to make sure that they thread this needle properly. So thank you for illustrating your timeline and for the diligence you've taken to make sure that both
Sorry, go ahead.
both factions are being represented fairly. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. I apologize for cutting your mic a little bit early there. That wasn't intentionally. And gentlemen, before you step back, thank you very much for being here. And to Assistant Superintendent Toon, apologize again for not allowing you all the time you wanted, but I will tell you this. If you would like time, if you would respond to those allegations that were made that you felt were against you personally, if you could get that to us in email, I'll personally make sure that it's distributed to members of this committee. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Superintendent Jill Gildea. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Gildea. And Board President Aaron Grady, representing Park City. And it looks like maybe we have a few extras as well, and so we're going to turn the time to, is this Aaron?
Thank you. I'm Jill
And
Gildea.
would you introduce the other folks you have
Yes.
there? Thank you.
I'm Superintendent Gildea. Thank you for having us. I have with me, we have a very tight presentation, timed, very tight to the script. So we are ready to be able to share that with you. With me today here, we have Board President Aaron Grady. We have a student, because we think a student voice is very important to this conversation. Jackson Smith is joining us. We have Vice President Wendy Crossland and our CTE Director, who's also our secondary curriculum lead, Lindsay Huntsman.
And as each one of you would speak, if you would state your name so we have a record. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Aaron Grady. I'm the president of the Board of Education for Park City. On October 18th, the Board of Education of Park City District adopted the policy to achieve compliance with the requirements of HB 374 and the administrative rules. This policy was a result of several months of hard work by school leadership and administrators that began after USBE distributed its model policy on July 26, 2022. We had some debate and dialogue on whether the sensitive materials requirements were best incorporated into an existing policy or should be an entirely separate policy. Ultimately, after several policy drafts were posted and community feedback received, the board decided to incorporate the necessary language into the existing policy 9050. We feel that at the end of the day, the revisions of policy 50 comply with state and federal law, adopt and review process with the reflective of our district and school community in determining whether an instructional material is sensitive material. demonstrates confidence in our educators and their professional expertise as to the selection of appropriate instructional materials. Notwithstanding that there is, of course, debate, as would be expected, we think that the policy amendments strike the right balance between ensuring access to age-appropriate instructional materials, representing the diversity of perspectives and goals of the legislation. The adopted policy represents the best thinking of the work of great number of committee participants, taking into account the feedback, insights provided by public stakeholders, and ensuring the Board of Education the time for dialogue, education, understanding, and adoption. As with any board policy, we anticipate that this process of review will be ongoing and that the policy and procedures may be subject to refinement in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Lindsay Huntsman, CTE Director and overseeing secondary curriculum and programs for Park City School District.
Welcome to our committee. Can you tell the committee what CTE stands for?
Career and technical education. So when you think of courses that are directly tied to a profession, those are the courses and the programs that I oversee.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay.
Good afternoon, and thank you for providing us with this opportunity. House Bill 374 is monopolizing resources and time at every level, which ultimately distracts from the learning process. Furthermore, House Bill 374 is asking lay people without proper training to interpret the law. Last month, staff from USBE acknowledged House Bill 374 places LEAs in a precarious position. The impending lawsuits directed at an LEA will fall under one of two categories. Is the LEA violating a right of access to free speech, or is the LEA violating state statute? So, as someone mentioned last month, what LEAs are currently dealing with is the question of how they want to be sued. This is not a comfortable position. Left without decisive clarity regarding relevant state and federal laws, LEAs are doing their best to interpret and comply with House Bill 374 and the Attorney General's June 1st memo. Ensure the committee is representative of our local community. Prepare and facilitate training for the selected review committee. Determine who manages House Bill 374 while also fulfilling their current duties. Literature affords us an opportunity as educators to provide mirrors and windows for our students. Our students live in an interconnected, diverse, and rapidly changing world. Collectively, we can prepare our students with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to be able to successfully navigate a complex and interconnected world while also understanding cultural differences. We have allowed polarity thinking to take over public education, like a superhero and villain storyline in a comic book. How do we as society shift from either-or thinking to a both-and perspective? Let's take a step in the right direction by empowering parents to make decisions for their own child, not everyone's child. When there are questions, use the procedures established at the local level to determine age appropriateness of the instructional and library materials that have been selected. Accusing educators of harboring pornographic material in classrooms and school library shelves is unfair. Educators across the state of Utah are thoughtful, intelligent, and above all, professionals. Let's trust our educators to make age-appropriate and topic-appropriate selections aligned to USBE-approved standards. After all, they're the experts who are more than deserving of grace, kindness, and respect.
Thanks, Ms. Huntsman.
My name is Jackson Smith. I speak on behalf of the students of Park City High School. Greetings to the committee and to Mr. Chairman. I thank everyone here for letting me speak, as I believe it's my duty to bring forth a few grievances of myself and my peers. Freedom is at the heart of America. My understanding of HB 374 is that it has taken away a lot of our freedoms. All our lives, we've been protected from damaging materials, things that would hurt us, things that would break our innocence. Yet when we look at the list of books coming from other states' versions of this House bill, you notice that content isn't targeted at protecting students. It's meant to hide marginalized voices. hundreds of books ranging from discussions on topics like gender equality and LGBTQIA plus representation have been pulled from the shelves. Topics on race, which often discuss the inequities of being white or non-white, are swiftly removed as not to offend any parents. With regard to a book about the horrors of the Holocaust and the Nazi regime, people cry that it's propaganda. What's troubling is that the books under scrutiny are often criticisms of the status quo and necessity in education and the work towards progress. Schools should teach us how to think, not what to think. Parents push their agendas by banning books they consider to be outside their realm of comfort. Shouldn't determine what we have to think, what we have to learn. The decision to challenge books for all should never be in the hands of one person, nor should it be dependent on what the whims of the scared believe. I stand before you today with the complete resolve of a student who has read many of the books pundits and demagogues refer to as propaganda or pornography, and I can assure you that banning these books will not solve anything. It only harms us students who wish to read, to learn. That's what school is for, is it not? We are to learn, to discuss, to change, and to become better than we once were. Freedom is the heart of America. Let us be free to read.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Does that conclude your presentation?
Just one more.
Okay.
My name is Wendy Crosland, and I'm the Vice President of the Park City School Board.
Thanks, Wendy.
And greetings, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We wanted to just close our presentation today with a couple thoughts. First, thank you for the opportunity and to be here and for calling us back after not being able to present last time. We appreciate that. It reflects a civil process that we all aim to be a part of, and we appreciate that we can be here and share our process with you. So thank you. Second of all, we want to assure you that we have worked diligently to develop and adopt a policy that is aligned with state and federal law. We also believe that our policy reflects the Attorney General's interpretation of House Bill 374, which we are required by law to presume is the correct interpretation of the law. The AG's opinion highlights the nuanced challenges posed by this law, namely the idea of a bright line rule, while also mitigating the risk of legal challenges and infringement on other protections for our students. The opinion includes several statements. I know of at least 4 I could cite right here, but we don't have time. In the AG's opinion, related to the bright line rule and the interplay of it with an analysis in good faith as to any overall value of the material. The ambiguity inherent in the law and the interpretation of it places a burden on our local education agencies for both not just time and resources, but also managing the exposure of potential and likely litigation. We are confident that our policy not only reflects the law, it also reflects our faith in our educators and their best practices and expertise in designing class curriculum about what is best and most appropriate for the students, as well as our librarians and their expertise and ability to manage a lot of materials while giving students the opportunity to be exposed to and grow through literature and text. We have a policy we believe supports our teachers to be the best to our students and for our students. We also have a policy that leans into parental choice and the ability of a caretaker to be part of the choice of what their child reads and what is best for their child. The policy does this while also protecting our students from both harm and from infringement on their rights. Finally, the policy is also reflective of the immense burden of time and resources on our district and LEAs. We believe that we have nuanced all these interests to the best of our ability while also adhering to the rule of law. We want to be clear that there is not one educator we have met, not one caretaker, not one student or administrator who does not want what is best for the students in our Park City schools. This has not been a process for us about whether we should expose our students to pornography or harm them through exposure to pornography. We do not and should not. Our process and commitment to meeting the demands of the House bill have been related to how to create a policy and process that reflects the laws, the various interests, and protects our students while offering a diverse and equitable education. At the end of the day, as a public school system, we are all interested in the same thing, the best education for all our students while prioritizing their interests and safety. Thank you again for setting up this civil discussion and opportunity for the Park City School District to be a part of it. We're grateful and we welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And I think I've said it to everyone, and I'll say it to Alpine for making the return trip. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get you last trip. There are 3 lights on. We're going to take 3 quick comments, and then we're going to have to move on. Let's go to Representative Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments. I wholeheartedly agree with you that we are all partners in this, and that our underlying desire is for the education of our children. I want to congratulate Mr. Smith for your comments. Very bright and articulate, and I think you touched upon something that I was trying to allude to in the section of the code that I suggested, and that is to include parents that are reflective of the community. I wanted to make sure that, especially with the books that we were considering, that those parents who are from those communities have a say in that. Often we are marginalized, we are ignored, and we are invisible. And so our stories go without being told. And when that happens, it is such a detriment to our children who don't get the benefit of sharing our stories with others, and also to be hearing, whether intentionally or not, to be hearing that they don't matter. And that's a shame. So I just wanted to thank you and congratulate you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bergman. I'm sorry, let me get there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you guys being here very much. I do want to convey constituents. They are not currently satisfied, saying that just last week they were told that some books that their kids brought home that had pornography and sexually explicit information were still available to their kids. They brought it into their home. And I want to extend to you guys, if you're willing, an opportunity to sit down and talk about your policy so more clearly I can understand, I can provide you some feedback from parents and just give you that offline opportunity if you're interested, because I appreciate wanting to make sure all voices are heard. I just want to make sure that we're truly hearing every voice. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Representative Berkland, for offering to do that. I think that's something that's helpful that all of us as lawmakers can do, is reach out and offer to have those direct conversations with members of our school board and administration. Final comment from Senator Johnson on this matter. Oops.
I think you've made some very, very good points. I mean, I don't know that people on this committee or the law was intended to remove diverse ideas from school libraries. It's mainly focused on this idea of pornography, okay? And as Michael Curtis said, based on the law, if something is defined as pornography, then it doesn't belong in the library, period, okay? It's fairly clear in the statute. Here's what it says. It says, first, description or depiction of illicit sex or sexual immorality means human genitals in a state of sexual stimulation or arousal, acts of human masturbation, sexual intercourse or sodomy, fondling or other erotic touching of human genitals or pubic region, or the fondling of other erotic touching of the human buttocks or female breast. Nude or partially denuded figure means less than completely and opaquely covering human genitals, the pubic region, the buttocks, female breast below a point immediately above the top of the areola. Okay, so it's fairly well defined what that bright line rule is. Those books do not belong in the library, period.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that just really quickly?
Very briefly, then we're going to move on. This is the last public or panel comment or committee comment we'll take, except from the chair. I've got something to say. It's my prerogative.
No, I appreciate that. We've read that law too and vetted it very well with lawyers and such. It is conflicting in the AG's opinion, referring to those 1, 2, and 3 points from the statute you just cited for us, where there's 4 different times, and I won't highlight all of them because we don't have time for that, where the AG suggests, and again, we need to defer to the AG's opinion above anybody else's by law before we look to anybody else's opinion. And it includes, it would benefit an LEA to mitigate the chances of legal challenges to analyze in good faith, to analyze for the value of the literature or the text in good faith before removal. The AG's opinion also states
Excuse me.
that
Quickly.
while the materials are being evaluated, they, into consideration, they should stay a book, otherwise should remain on the shelves if it might have other value. So our policy reflects this interpretation. You can read different sections of the AG's and it's inherently ambiguous, and it creates some conflict of interpretation. And we're doing the best we can with that.
Thank you. And my sense is that our school administration in many ways are doing the best. Now, let me just say this. As I mentioned, we're not, and I just had a couple of thoughts, and exercising my prerogative as a chair, recognizing that Representative Ivory is still here, who is the sponsor. Here's a couple of thoughts. First, I had a conversation with representatives of the Attorney General's office and recommended that they provide additional clarification to their opinion. I think there are many in administration and who are on boards that could benefit by that. Second, with respect to the bill itself, it appears to me that there could be more clarification built in terms of the process. And Representative Ivory, it's as easy for a lame duck chairman to say, make comments, I'm not going to be here. But it occurs to me that part of the problem is the review process. And I'm thinking something that we borrow from the law is cases of temporary orders that can be issued, temporary restraining orders where we have an initial review, then subject to a more in-depth review. And perhaps that's something that could be built in. That initial review could be conducted by school administration, maybe with a couple of teachers who could act quickly on the bright line issue, subject to a more in-depth review by the committee to make a final determination. Those are simply suggestions. I'm not saying that fixes it, but it appears to me as I've listened to comments that part of the frustration is that the final review may take too long, and that maybe people could be benefited by a more quick review of some of these issues. So with that, and I'm not taking any other comments, so thank you again.
Thank you.
The districts were here. We apologize again for not being able to hear you when you appeared last time. And the last thing I'll say is this. These things are hard, but I think one of the things that we've tried to do as legislature and in this committee is when we recognize there's issues, is we address them the next session. And I have a feeling that this is something we can work on and address to help you all. So thanks. Okay, next item. Before we go to the next numbered item, we're going to go back to item number 1, which is approving the minutes of our October 19th, 2022 meeting. We have a quorum here, so I would entertain a motion in that regard. Thank you, Representative Ballard. The motion is that we approve the minutes of October 19th, 2022 by Representative Ballard. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. The minutes are approved. Item number 3 on the agenda is the Public Education School Accountable System redesign. We're going to turn time to Darren Nielsen, who is with the State Board of Education, to give us an update on the final report and let us ask questions or make comments. So Darren, welcome to our committee.
Yes, thank you for having me today. Before I begin, again, my name is Darren Nielsen, the Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning for the State Board of Education. Mr. Chairman, can I
apologize.
That's okay. Mr. Chairman, can I request to understand how much time you would like me to adjust my content out of respect for your full agenda?
Thank you for asking that question. We went a little bit over with these last 3, although those were important. But if you could keep it within 7 minutes, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. I'll certainly do that. The report that's been a number of people have been working on for the last almost 12 months now is uploaded as an attachment. And it's something that I would encourage any legislator or public member of the public who has interest in considering a next generation school accountability system to look at the details in that report. I'll focus my comments on a few highlights of the recommendations contained in that report, and I'll skip through a few of these slides to get to that point. I just first want to acknowledge for all of the public that we recognize that this body and your colleagues has responsibility and authority over the school accountability system, and you designate some of those responsibilities or the responsibility for implementing those to the State Board of Education, which requires an effective partnership to move forward. Just a few seconds on the committee makeup. This work was organized around 2 committees. There was an executive committee made up of 17 members that met early on to provide guidance to the advisory committee, which I'll talk about briefly in just a moment. 8 members of this interim committee serve on the executive committee for the school accountability redesign work. Most recently, they met on October 31st. And we weren't able to have a quorum there, so there was no official motion or action taken on the report, but it was provided to the executive committee. The advisory committee was made up of, in the end, 29 members from across the state. We used a Noah's Ark model to select people, try to get 2 of each representative group. You'll see the positions that are listed there, and my highlight here is just to recognize significant amount of work that these committee members put into providing these recommendations in the report. You'll see that it equals over 1,500 hours of combined effort, and I'll come back to this at the very end. We did engage the public, and so there's a valuable resource in the back of, as an appendix in this report. You'll find all of the public comment. The advisory committee consumed that public comment and used it to inform the recommendations that are contained within the report that we'll talk about briefly. Well, there's a lot of recommendations. There's 2 that I want to focus on today that are key recommendations. One is the inclusion of local indicators that count. Currently, the school accountability system allows for each school to upload up to 2 locally identified indicators into the school report card and the dashboard, but those indicators are not scored. And therefore, you can imagine that compliance or the activity around that is less than what one might expect. The second primary recommendation is around the way the accountability information be displayed, and that's the use of a profile report approach. And I'll show you more about that here in just a second. So the local indicators, this committee believes that you could advance the school accountability system in a meaningful and powerful way by allowing schools to have 3 local indicators that are scored, part of the weighted indicators, one around school climate. And you'll notice school climate and supporting learner agency are inputs. Sometimes there's debate about whether an accountability system should just measure outputs or inputs. This advisory committee felt like these are 2 very important inputs that are leading indicators to improved academic outcomes. And then finally, the outputs around our portrait of a graduate competencies. On the local indicators, there was a lot of very meaningful and powerful discussion around this, and this concept that if we're to make changes to the school accountability system, that leveraging existing infrastructures that are in place. So you'll see here a nod to the school accreditation system, and I'll talk more about that when we get to an example of the indicators, and also our School Lands Trust program that's already in existence here in Utah to help minimize the necessity for schools to create new systems to build in this local indicator into the school accountability system. So here's an example, a graphic that would depict on the left-hand side are the blue squares are the state indicators that are comparable across the state. Currently, you'll note that all indicators in the school accountability system have that characteristic associated with them. They're indicators that have comparability across schools. You'll see Leadership for Learning there in red. That is a nod to the accreditation process. In our public input gathering, the members of the public in the state of Utah value very highly educator and administrator effectiveness as an indicator for school quality in their neighborhoods. And the accreditation process for secondary schools already puts extensive work into giving information that could be leveraged into an accountability system around that indicator. On the right-hand side, the green boxes represent those local indicators. These would all be new or part of a next generation accountability system, and the potential alignment with the school land trust infrastructure. I want to pause for just a minute to talk about that. This infrastructure that's been established by the Utah legislature and has been in place as long as I've been an educator in the state of Utah, so in excess of 21 years, is very well developed. It establishes the requirement for community councils that are chaired by a parent, have a majority of parents as voting members, has educators in the school who serve on that committee, and it always includes the involvement of the school leader. That committee is already charged with identifying the school's greatest academic need. They have to develop goals annually of how they're going to address those needs. Those goals have to be approved by their local district. They have to be then, the finances around that have to be approved by the school lands trust staff. They implement those goals, the actions around those goals, and then the following year they have to report out whether they achieved those goals in a public meeting, and that information is published on their website. Right now, there's a disconnect between the work that those school community councils do for school improvement and the overall school accountability system. So the committee believes, and you'll see this in the full report, that there's a lot of leverage that could be accessed by utilizing that infrastructure that's already established to incorporate one or more of these local indicators in a way that could be included and scored in an accountability system. Excuse me.
No, you're fine. I'm going to interrupt you because I limited your time, I think, a little too much. This is really important work. It's work that's gone over, I think, a couple of years.
Just over 12 months, yes.
So I understand the auditor's report coming after. They can restrict their time a bit. So you're fine if you take a little bit more time. So
okay, I'll try to slow down.
I won't. I don't want to keep turning up and down a dial, but I just want to be respectful of your work and the work of this group.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So you'll see here, this depicts the elementary and middle school. You'll notice right off that there's not an accreditation metric here. That's because accreditation is not required in schools that serve students in grades kindergarten through 8, whether that's a public charter school or a traditional public school. Again, everything in the blue box is already part of this accountability system that the Utah legislature has established. This committee is recommending that to take it into a next generation accountability system while also still maintaining compliance with some of the federal requirements around school accountability system, that we consider incorporating local indicators that would connect more directly to each LEA's school improvement plans or their Teacher Student Success Act plans, and then at the school level, the very important school land trust community council plans that they establish each year and implement.
Darren, we've got a question from one of our committee members. Representative Johnson, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darren, I understand the items in the blue box and also the items in the green box. And has the committee talked about how that lay group that make up that, that committee that takes a look at your school improvement plan and then relates that to, growth objectives that need to be done? There's a large amount of training, I think, that needs to be done there. Is that part of this moving forward? Training for those individuals?
Yeah, Chair, can I respond to that?
Certainly.
Yes, Representative Johnson, you've hit on something that was discussed at length by the committee, and in the full report, it'll talk about considerations both at the state level of education, at the district or LEA, and then at the school level. I took the opportunity after I saw the committee was heading down this direction, potentially for a recommendation around school lands trust, and met with the advisory group over school lands trust plans. And that was actually the first thing that they indicated was that training already exists. But if we're going to connect this in a more visual and perhaps more meaningful way to overall school accountability, that there would need to be extensive training for the community councils. There's a wide variation of, what word I would use here. I was going to go with competency, but that's not exactly right. Across the state, some of our community councils are well staffed. You have elections for the spots, and then there are other community councils where there needs to be an extensive amount of recruitment that undergoes to try to get community members to be willing to serve on those councils. So along with that, and then the training were the two of the primary issues that they raised.
May I ask one follow-up very quickly?
Certainly, absolutely.
I'm also interested in, as you look at the items that are in the blue box, the number of parents that opt out of the assessment system in the charter world as well as in the regular public school world. Was there discussion about the number of people who are no longer taking these assessments?
Not in the accountability, the advisory committee for accountability, but the state board recently completed a strategic plan for assessment to kind of look 5-10 years out. What would statewide assessment look like? And parental exclusion is certainly considered in that discussion. At our elementary levels, our participation rates have returned to pre-pandemic levels. So we're around 96% of the students statewide participate. And to your point, in charter schools, especially charter schools that deliver their instructional programs in an online setting, it's much lower than that. And there's some real barriers. There's some reasons for that other than just, I don't want to take the test. In our secondary setting, grades 9 and 10 in particular, we're still struggling to see student participation in statewide assessment return to pre-pandemic levels. We're still in the mid-80s. So that is a challenge. And I actually had a separate note here. I had a member of our community council for a Salt Lake City area high school contact me with concerns about parental exclusion. As well, we had a lengthy conversation about that.
Go ahead.
Yes, moving forward, Mr. Chair, I think that exclusion thing is going to, and how that affects accountability and how teachers look at that for what they're held accountable for when certain students in their classes are no longer taking that assessment. It scares them a little bit. So I'm glad that I know you're very aware of it and you'll address it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative. Please continue.
All right, I'll go on. So let's talk for a moment about this profile approach on our dashboard. I mentioned earlier that the current school accountability system does have a dashboard that takes into account some profile elements. The large change here would be the recommendation to refrain from issuing an overall school rating or creating a system that's really driven by points and looking at this profile. So I want to talk about this. The advisory committee felt like this profile approach is actually much more transparent and consumable than the current system that we have. So this is an example. It's really rudimentary, but I wanted you to see what it could look like generally or conceptually. Be on a 4-point scale. It can be on a 3 or a 5. 4-point scales are typically most common. You'll see the blue bars represent those indicators that are comparable across the state. Including the accreditation, because that's a standardized process. The ratings that schools and districts receive for their high schools on educator and leader qualities would be able to be comparable across the state. And then the green ones are those that still have comparability value, but it's comparability within the school over time is where we would be looking at there. And obviously there'd be a lot of details and a large amount of work that would need to be done should the Utah State Legislature choose to go forward incorporating local indicators in a scored system. But I'm confident that we could take on that challenge if that decision is made. So in the end towards the back end of the report, we've broken out individual policies that if this body and your colleagues decided to move forward with advancements towards a next generation accountability system in Utah, there's specific policies that have been highlighted to try to simplify that work for any of you and your colleagues who would like to advance that. And here's a list of some of those. So next steps, it's up to those who have been elected to decide, particularly the Utah State Legislature, to decide whether these recommendations are something you'd like to advance. This next sentence comes directly from the report, and this would be my concluding thought, and that is the committee, so the advisory committee urges that the policymakers recognize the intense amount of effort and deliberations that went into this. I mentioned earlier the number of hours of work that's been dedicated to this. These are all individuals. There's some parents obviously on there, but a lot of them are educators or they fill some direct education leadership position. They gave up time that they were required to work to come and be part of this, and many of them were dedicated all the way through the process. So my comment would just reflect what this last sentence, which comes out of the report, is that you'll consider these recommendations thoughtfully, and if there needs to be additional dialogue about that, be happy to lead that. I guess finally, I would say this report was presented to the Utah State Board of Education in their November meeting. And I use that term very specifically. This report again represents recommendations from this advisory committee. It was shared with the executive committee and it was received by the Utah State Board of Education. And that concludes my presentation, but I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Darren. We have some questions. I would remind members of the committee that a full text of this report is on your working group webpage. Am I right about that, Darren?
Yes.
And so as you look at these recommendations and decide whether or not you want to move forward with any policy, they can access that report there. Let's go to Senator Reeby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all the work you've done with this accountability redesign. On one of the slides, it talks about a highly transparent process to use this accountability. And I know in some of the conversations we talked about how it's easy to have people come to the school to talk about what they want, but it's to get some of the information from people that aren't working or they can't get to the school as often as they like or talk to the school as much. So I know we have the Trust Lands Committee and we have student council committees, but you also illustrated some schools that really don't have these committees fully vetted and manned, for lack of another word. So how can we help build that climate, and can you illustrate how this accountability redesign is actually working to make that climate? Because I think that was really important, how we really did try to find a way to make sure that our families had conduits always to work with their schools to make their schools better.
Yeah, Chair.
Please.
Yeah, so it's been clear. I mean, I believe this at my core, but even your most recent legislative session, it was clear that increased parental engagement and connection to the schools is highly valued. And we saw that in pieces of legislation that came out most recently, and even today there's discussion about, how do we get a representative portion of all of our parents connected with the school. The community council, again, is a structure that's in place that in some places that works really well. And I believe that that's actually a good mechanism to bring about, that could be an excellent conduit in every school community where they have those voices. I wasn't sure if your question, though, was related to the dashboard concept.
We could maybe talk about it offline, but I just really like that we, in this committee, really were seeking lots of different outlooks and not just to the people who actually came to the school, because I think that that's part of the struggle that we have here, trying to include people that really sometimes don't have time to be included, and we really did reach out, and we were really trying to find out what everybody believed. And so when we talked about climate, that's some of the things we talked about. So just hoping to emphasize that point, because people really want to be involved in their kids' educations.
That was particularly apparent when we did the public engagement, which concluded, we conducted that right at the conclusion of the 2021 legislative session. So you experienced heavy parental, community engagement with you and your process. It was very clear to the parents, both their attendance in our in-person meetings and the statewide virtual engagement opportunities, the survey, and then the comments that we received. Parents are looking to make sure that they have a voice in their school and want to be connected in a way that's meaningful.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your responses. Any further questions of Darren? I have a couple. Has your report been vetted, or has it been picked up by I can't remember the board or the association of LEAs, the Board Association, Superintendent Association? Have they weighed in on these changes at all?
Great question. They were represented on the advisory committee. There were 2 superintendents as well as charter school directors. I also presented and kept them updated. I think the most recent update I provided them was either in September or August, and shared that information with them at that time as well. They had voice officially in the advisory committee that helped formulate these recommendations.
Thank you. And likewise, the PTA or the UEA, they have been informed as well.
Both of those groups had representation in the advisory committee as well. And then you're stretching my memory here. I believe I provided a report recently to the PTA or the PTA, but that might have been restricted. That presentation restricted just to outcomes from the 2022 assessment. But both of those groups had voices in the advisory committee process.
If this is a policy, if the dashboard or profile approach were adopted by our state, does that mean as a parent that I could go online and look at one page and see how my child's school is doing in each of those areas? Is that how that works?
Yeah, we used the advisory committee discussed it in the context of consumer reports, and I don't know how many of these committee members here have used consumer reports. I have a few times when I'm buying large ticket items, and there's certain attributes that I value. So, and other consumers might not value those attributes as much. This dashboard gives you a chance to be able to see all of those, and you decide, in this example, if post-secondary readiness is one of the more important attributes that I have for my neighborhood high school, then I would see that they're performing very well there, and it looks like a good fit for me, and it looks like they're making efforts that don't require a lot more community involvement to bring about changes. If in this example, one of the most important attributes for me was that they're doing a good job in helping students who are learning English become proficient in English quickly, that'd be an area that as a parent I'd probably be like, well, okay, I better go and engage this community, the school, in a way to figure out what's going on there and how we can make changes to make that a better outcome for my neighborhood school.
And would this kind of profile dashboard, that's what I'll call it, would that include charter schools?
Yeah, it would be used for every public school in the state. Again, it's under the direction of the legislature, though, obviously.
And any of the legislators that want to follow up and look at policy or opening up a bill file on this, Darren, you'd be available to assist and answer questions?
Yes.
I knew the answer to that. Thank you for your presentation, and I don't have any other lights, but also thank you for your willingness to support the work of lawmakers if any of them decide to take these recommendations on. And I hope you take back to your working group too how much. Next item on the agenda is to review a legislative audit, performance audit of curriculum and teacher training in public education. So Ms. Bevins and Mr. Boone, am I right about that?
Good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome.
Well, thank you for letting us come. We will keep this short, but I thank the committee for hearing this, thanking USBE for all of their hard work in assisting with this and joining us in the effort to do the audit, and then all the teachers and principals and districts that really responded to surveys, and we interviewed a lot of principals, and we are really just grateful for their participation in this process. So with that, if it's okay, I'm going to let Matthias take over.
Please proceed.
Thank you. It's great to be with you this afternoon to give you a simplified version. The goal is to simplify but not oversimplify. So I'm certainly willing to give you some more details with more questions. So as Leah mentioned, this was a request of the audit subcommittee to look at curriculum and content and how it's currently operating within the state. There's no standards, there's no best practices for how curriculum should be managed. And so what we did was we interviewed parents, teachers, we surveyed over 10,000 teachers and LEA staff to get their perspectives on how curriculum currently works. We've reviewed course standards and even looked through course content for 44 courses within 5 districts. Our goal is, again, to simply understand the condition of how curriculum operates within the state in an effort to inform policy. This is the last slide I will show you. This is our effort to really simplify this audit for you, and I'll talk about these 3 points. Overall, we found curriculum is managed very differently from district to district. In how it's adopted, I'll start with that. How it's adopted, some districts have a very strong top-down approach where the district selects the curriculum, pushes it down to teachers. Other districts select it at the teacher and teacher team level and pushes that throughout the school and into the classroom. The second finding that we report in the audit is simply that the content reviews occur at very different levels within a district. And so teachers, as you would imagine, are reviewing their content to the greatest degree, but then it kind of falls from there. Principals in some cases, curriculum directors, and districts in general in other cases.
And I'd just like to jump in and mention that all of the teachers that we interviewed really want to do this right. They are very much trying to do their best. They're not sure what they can talk about and what they can't. But they all are professionals trying to do their best. And I just wanted to note that.
Absolutely. The third and final piece that we report in Chapter 2 is that something this committee, I think, is very aware of, is that some districts have different essential standards. And as a result of that, you'll get different content within the same subject from district to district. That's just the reality of it. The conclusion and the recommendation that we make from this chapter is, in this landscape of varied district curriculum management processes, the legislature should consider whether the status quo is appropriate or whether they want to impact this or develop some policy to bring that into greater uniformity. The other points that I want to make here, again, just very briefly, is that some districts need stronger processes for curriculum. We found only a few districts that had approved book lists on the front end or grievance processes on the back end of teaching. And so there's an opportunity here, again, for the legislature to consider whether to require stronger processes for districts. And again, that's a balancing act, because this legislature really believes strongly in local control, but simply requiring that they provide their own guardrails would really help to provide some strength over those processes. The final piece that we wanted to highlight is that teacher expectations and training regarding their neutrality and balanced content are very inconsistent and can be strengthened, and we provide some recommendations on how that can be achieved. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Before I let you go, tell the committee how you define processes. What are we talking about? Give us some examples.
Sure. Processes is synonymous with controls in this way in this report, and so a lot of districts had policies on how